Golbonites on this lovely sunny morning as we meet together in this funny way to worship around the scriptures. Now, what have I been up to? Let me try and reverse this camera. Oh, it won't let me. Not to worry, I'll take you around. And I've been doing some paintings. That one is the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And if you look very closely, it's done in a wild style, but if you look very closely, the Opera House in the background and the Harbour Bridge, but they're all sort of hidden away, so you have to look very carefully to find them. And they're riding through Sydney in the tribulation. Oh, that's what fundamental Christians do during COVID. Over here, I've been doing a crucifixion painting. That's a really sort of big painting, as you can see. And I'm going to enter that into the Blake Religious Prize for Art, which I think I have to put that in November for showing in April. Whether I get in the final or not is debatable, because I know what they're after. They're after Aboriginal spirituality and all that type of thing. So, here we go. Let's do our Bible study. Now, what I've decided to do, because you know I have finished 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and I had a delightful time doing that. But one thing that struck me was the prominence in the Bible of false teaching, and I've decided to go back to the Gospels, and you will see that none other than the Lord himself had the same problem with false teachers in his day. It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the lawyers and so forth. And I've decided to take us this morning at least to Luke chapter 12. So I'll give you a moment to look that up in your Bibles. Luke chapter 12. If you find that. Luke chapter 12. And this is a huge series of sermons. I'm going to spend a little while putting this in context, because that's important to me. It's been a bit of a weakness of mine not to know the life of Christ enough. And I'm going to address that now and drag you along for the ride. So I'll start in Luke chapter 12, and then I might go backwards and I might go forwards and so forth. And gradually, hopefully, we will get a good idea of what's actually going on as the Lord goes towards the cross. So I will take you, let's read this little passage first, and then I'll take you around the scriptures. Okay, Luke chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and there is nothing hidden that won't be known. Therefore, whatever you have spoken in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have spoken in the ear, in the inner rooms, will be proclaimed upon the housetops. So the setting here is the Lord is speaking, and he's speaking to a huge crowd, thousands of people, and then he turns to disciples. We'll clarify that in a minute. And then he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. So that's the title. If you want to remember something today, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, because it is hypocrisy. Now, let's set the scene. I'm a big one for geography, so I'll try this. I've drawn a map, and there we go. So this is reversed to me, so I assume it's okay for you. Let's just do some basic geography and be familiar with the topography of Israel. Now, I must tell you that Linda and I, during this COVID, have latched ourselves onto these Messianic Jews and their live webinars, is what they call them, down in, they're down in Victoria, what are they called? Celebrate Messiah. And we've been up on the feasts and all sorts of things and getting very interested in the interaction between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And that's been good for us. So here we go, Israel. So right here is the Dead Sea. And if I was live with you, I'd say this is, and you would answer, Sea of Galilee. And the river is, and you would answer, Jordan River coming down. Now let's try and relate it to ourselves. So if I'm here at the top of the Dead Sea and I was to walk up to the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, it would take me 2 days. It's about 100 kilometres. So it'd be like you walking from Goulburn, not you Lillian, but you walking from Goulburn to maybe Bargo and or past Yass somewhere. I think it's about 80 k's to Yass or something. So that's a 2-day walk there. So you can see it's not a very big country at all. And it's not much changed from today as to how it would have been then. There were a lot less people then, of course. And I'll just show you a picture now because we got a calendar from these Messianic Jews. I'll show you a picture of this letter J here is for Jerusalem. So this whole area is, this area here is Judea there. This is Idumea, from where one of the Herods came from. This is Judea, and this over here, there is the region of Perea, like we would say southern tablelands, southern highlands, that sort of thing. The coast, they say, okay, Judea, Perea. Now this area just around here, just here would be Bethlehem, and it's about 10 kilometres south of Jerusalem. So this is what Bethlehem looks like. It's quite sparse, isn't it? And desolate, very dry. And that's Bethlehem today. So it wouldn't have changed that much from the Lord's day. So when Jesus was tempted and went into the wilderness, most people, it doesn't really say in the scriptures, but most people think it's in this region of Judean wilderness in here, which apparently is a very, very desolate place in here. So as we travel up north, so this is 100 kilometres, you can see there's a range of hills all the way up the road. Now, this area in here is a no-go zone for Jewish people because that's Samaria. If a Jew was to travel from up here down to Jerusalem, he might start out this way and then cut across the river and go down this way through, I think this is Decapolis here, the region of Decapolis. Up here, when we get near the Sea of Galilee, this is called Galilee, the region of Galilee. And if we keep going up, now maybe another 50 kilometres, we reach Mount Hermon, which is where the Lord supposedly was transfigured before. Caesarea Philippi is about here, and then he went up to supposedly Mount Hermon and was transfigured before Peter. And coming back down the region of Galilee, Capernaum, Nazareth, that's where Jesus grew up, right at the base there. This is a plain, a coastal plain. It's a bit like going from where I live, from Robertson, down to the coast. So it's quite hilly in Jerusalem, around the Jerusalem area. Okay, so that's the geography. When we come to chapter 12 of Luke, we are here, down here, not up here. In chapter 12 of Luke, Jesus has already completed 3 years of ministry. And he did Galilean tours up around here, just going from town to town to town to town. But here, we will, if you just turn in your Bible to chapter 9 of Luke, verse 51. Chapter 9 of Luke, verse 51. So just prior to what we're going to talk about today, down here, he's up here in Galilee, and in chapter 9 of Luke, he says, "Now it came to pass, when the time had come for him to be received up," that is, ascended up to heaven. So it's all pre-programmed by God. Nothing is happening by chance. "That he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem." So the time had come, 3 years, he completed 3 years of ministry. I believe it's probably around, it's anywhere from now, when we think of Jesus dying on the cross. Where is that? There we go. When we think of the Lord dying on the cross, we know that is in April, our April, or the Jewish month of Nisan, in April, the Passover. So a Jewish male, would have to travel to Jerusalem 3 times a year at least. So they used to be able to walk well. 2-day trip, if you lived up here, 3 times a year at least, down to the 3 feasts at the temple in Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem was crowded 3 times a year. So you have the Feast of Passover, which is when Jesus was crucified. You have the Feast of Pentecost, which was 7 weeks after that, or 50 days. And then you have the period of time we're in now, which is the Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And that's where the holy day for the Jews is Yom Kippur is involved in that, and where they atone or they cover their sins. They're never removed or they're never forgiven, they're just simply covered. And the Jewish people had celebrated that for years and years and years, and were still doing it during the time of Jesus. So Jesus now for 3 years had been saying, I am God amongst you. He proved it up here with numerous miracles, raising the dead, blind to see, deaf to hear, dumb to talk, casting out demons, stilling, controlling nature, stilling storms, creating bread, etc. He'd given ample proof, not only through his deeds, but through the words that came from his mouth, that he was indeed the Messiah of Israel. And after 3 years, their grand conclusion was, the religious leaders at least, their grand conclusion was, no, you are not. In fact, what you're doing by the power of Satan. And that was completely irrational, as we'll find out in due course, but that's what happens when you are a hypocrite. You can't think straight. So, back to Luke 9:51. So Jesus is now up here, and it's 3 years of ministry, and I believe it's probably around about now. No one knows for sure. I'm following roughly the chronology that's in Wilmington's Guide to the Bible. I know David has a copy of that, so you'll find a 72 steps or something from his birth to glory, or from glory to glory, and I'm following roughly that chronology. So we find Jesus steadfastly determined to set his face to go to Jerusalem down here. Now, instead of the way the Jews went to Jerusalem, he was going to go straight down through Samaria. And he sent messages before his face as they went. Verse 52, they entered the village of the Samaritans to prepare for him, but they did not receive him. And this was even the Samaritans would not receive him, because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did? But he turned and rebuked them and said, you do not know what manner of spirit you are of, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went to another village. So he's coming down through Samaria into this area, and he will cross over here into Perea, the region of Perea. And Luke 12, 13, 14, etc. is what is known as the Perean ministry. And he crossed across to Bethany, Bethlehem, Bethphage. There's a lot of Beths in Israel. Bethsaida up here, and there's more Beth Haran. Beth's everywhere, and it's a shortened form of the word Elizabeth, and Beth means house, or Bethlehem means house of bread. So my mother's one of her names is Elizabeth, and everyone calls her Betty. So lots of names of Beth in Israel. So here he is now down here, I believe around about this time of year, and he will be crucified like next April. So he virtually stays down here with short visits back up to his hometown, but no longer does he preach and teach up here in the region of Galilee. It's all done down here in Perea and around Jerusalem, down here. So this is where we find ourselves now. The people are set. He has true disciples. He has inquiring disciples who may decide to follow him. But the reason I want to study this is because I want us to find out what a true disciple of Jesus Christ looks like. I feel, just looking at the worldwide situation in the church and even in Australia, that the Christian church is bowing to the pressure of the crowds, and because it's getting weaker and weaker and weaker, the church is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker in diluting the gospel message. And I want us to go right back to the source and hear the words of Jesus himself. So with that in mind, let's quickly go to Luke chapter 12. And we find Jesus here. And it says, verse 1, in the meantime what? Well, it tells us that he'd just visited the house of a Pharisee in which were lawyers or experts in the law of Moses. And in that house, he pronounced six woes on the whole hypocrisy of the Pharisee and the religious establishment of his time. So the number one clue we get here from Jesus is this: we need to be fearless in denouncing false religion. We need to be fearless in condemning that which purports to be true, but in fact is false. The reason being, we can have hypocrites in the secular world, but when we get into the religious realm and we lead people astray through purporting to know the truth but not really knowing it, we're actually damning people to eternal hell. And that's why it's critical to just call it out. In chapter 12, he begins, "In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together." So you can imagine after 3 years of this person wandering, it's only 2 days journey there, it's only 100 kilometres, Goulburn Tobago, news would have spread that this person was doing amazing things that no one had ever seen before. But what he wasn't doing, that the Jewish establishment wanted, he wasn't throwing off the shackles of Rome. And this confused them, and they'd hardened their hearts, and they determined to do whatever it took to have him killed and out of the way. Between the Old Testament and the New Testament, we find there a system of religion had developed in Judaism which was false. A series of rules and regulations that had nothing to do with the Old Testament scriptures, but everything to do with rabbis and schools of thought, which is a bit like our religious world today. The evangelical world has all sorts of little variations that does nothing but confuse people. So he says, "In the meantime, an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together." So here's Jesus surrounded by, when it says innumerable, that's because they can't, the Greek language only has, the highest number in the Greek language, a word designated for is the word thousand. So when you see the word myriad, it means 1,000 or 10,000 or thousands upon thousands. So you've got here a crowd of thousands of people surrounding this one man, hanging off his every word. You have people there that are genuinely inquiring, not that many. You have his devoted followers who are confused, bewildered. They know he's real, but what next? What's going to happen tomorrow? He keeps talking about his impending death. You have the scribes and Pharisees, the hypocrites, he's surrounding them, just hanging off every word he says. I was always taught years ago that self-centered people, which hypocrites are, hang off your every word. I don't know whether you've ever been in the company of people who hang off your every word and just wait to pounce, or they're all super sensitive or something. Well, the Pharisees were like this. They just wanted to trap him from his words. But what they didn't realise, they were dealing with the God incarnate, the Lord Jesus Christ. So this innumerable multitude, thousands and thousands of people surrounding Jesus, it says, so much so that they trampled each other's feet, trying to get close to hear his voice. So thousands of people trying to get close to hear his voice. Jesus, in the midst of this massive multitude, maybe just a few months before his death, turns to his disciples and says to them, first of all, so I find this sort of amusing in one way, or quite telling. What do you do, preacher, when you're called to preach to crowds of thousands of people? What's your opening remark? Jesus' opening remark is, like we're always told, you have to win the crowd over, you have to tell a few jokes, get the crowd win, and then they'll start to listen to you. What does Jesus do? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, for it is hypocrisy. That's how you speak to a crowd of this magnitude. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, for it is hypocrisy. Now he's saying that to his disciples. Now there's some people there, not many. Bear in mind that when the early disciples gathered after Jesus had ascended up to heaven, there were only 120. 120. That's all. So there weren't that many that were genuinely interested. They were just fascinated by the fact that he might do some sort of miracle. And the religious ones were just trying to trap him so that they could accuse him and have him killed, so they could go on with their hypocrisy. So he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. But why? Because it is hypocrisy. So he said to leaven, and what leaven is, as you know, is this fermented yeast that if you put it in the dough of the bread, it permeates the bread. And Jesus says, that's what the Pharisees are like. They're an evil influence. They purport, the word hypocrisy means actor in Greek. It means the person who's a hypocrite is being something that they're not really. They're purporting to know the truth about God, but they don't really know the truth. And so he says that is leaven, because when that is introduced into the church, it permeates in the church and corrupts the church. So not only are they not going to heaven because they don't really know the truth, so they can't give you the truth, but they are leading other people in untruth about God, and therefore they are taking them into hell with them. So he says, beware of this leaven. It has an influence. It permeates throughout the religious world of the Pharisees. It is hypocrisy. It's acting. And then he says, so what was the actual hypocrisy of these Pharisees? And we know, and I'll go back and forth with this in no doubt there's sermons to come, but how did it express itself? How does it express itself today? I just got a little letter in my letterbox this morning when we got back from walking the dog from the Jehovah's Witnesses. Because of COVID, they can't get around and knock on doors and so forth, so they're putting personal letters in people's boxes and asking them to go to their website and so forth. So what does hypocrisy actually look like? What is Jesus warning these people about? He says, beware of this leaven, beware of this evil influence in the religious world. What does it look like? Well, it looks like this. It focuses on outward appearance, and it hides the truth of what it really is. So whenever you see hypocrisy, it's got an outward look to it, and it's hiding the inward reality that it's not true at all. It's false. So in our day, let me just be quite frank, if I can't think with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very pious about the way they go around. They always dress very well and very neat and tidy, and it's an outward show. With the Pharisees in Jesus' day, they would blow a trumpet. Kafir. They would blow the ram's horn, and everyone would look and listen, and when they blow the ram's horn, they would put some money in a box and say, look, I'm giving to the temple. They would put a very mournful look on their faces to let everyone know that they were fasting. They would enlarge the phylacteries. The phylacteries are those little leather boxes they put on their foreheads and on their arms, and they would have bigger ones, bigger than anyone else, or the tassels on their garments would be longer. So it's always an outward show, hiding the inward reality that they are false. What else would they do? They craved an invitation to banquets and so forth like that. So false religion will always want to be seen. I can't tell you how silly I think the Roman Catholic priests look in all those silly helmets that they wear when the Pope gets elected and so forth. It's an outward show, and it's false. They view themselves as spiritually superior to common people. And Jesus even sort of joked about this once. He said, why don't you get the beam out of your own eye instead of looking at that little speck in somebody else's eye? Hypocrites tend to look down on people and they criticise the faults of others. They have a malicious intent. They get quite nasty when they're called out. Jesus was sought to be trapped by the Pharisees when he was ministering. They said, whose tax shall you pay? They tried to trick him and get him in trouble with the Romans. And he said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, to God the things that are God's. They were always trying to trap him, and they had a malicious intent. They had no intention of whether they cared about Rome or Jesus or taxes or anything. They would just had the evil intent. They lacked discernment. I was quite amazed when Ben Shapiro is an American news commentator. He's a young Jewish man. He's unashamedly Jewish, Orthodox Jew and all that. But he lacks discernment. I remember one day watching John MacArthur sit down with him and go through Isaiah 53, but he couldn't see it. They just can't see. They lack discernment. Jesus said, you can tell the weather. You know, red sky at night, the shepherd's delight. Red sky in the morning, the shepherd's warning. You can tell the weather, but you can't tell the fact that Jesus the Messiah is right here in your midst. And it's a very sad thing to watch. They lack compassion. Hypocrites lack compassion. When Jesus healed on the Sabbath days, he healed a woman who had a crippling disease for 18 years, and they criticised him for healing on the Sabbath day. That's what hypocrites do. They don't really care about the actual person. They care about the look, how they look. In the Jews' case, how they looked on the Sabbath day and the rules and regulation and so forth. I do note that 60 Minutes, I only saw it on YouTube. I don't normally watch those things, but I do note I watched it for 20 minutes. They did an expose on Hillsong Church, and one of the things, the main points the reporter was making was that two girls were sexually assaulted by staff members or something, but it was a lack of compassion to the actual girls, and to uphold the look of the organisation was more important than compassion on the plight of the two girls. And how true all that is, I don't really know, because you've got to be very careful with news media these days. Jesus says, this is what will happen. Take comfort in this. Nothing covered up will not be revealed, and nothing hidden will not be known. Jesus says to his disciples, in amongst his thousands and thousands of people, just beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, for it is hypocrisy. But don't forget this, nothing covered will not be revealed, and nothing hidden will not be known. There is a day of reckoning, and God is the final judge. Jesus amongst them is omnipresent, omniscient. Every single thing is known to God. The reality of what lies in a person's heart is known to God, and it will be revealed. In Romans 2, verse 16, Paul writes, there is a day, according to the gospel, when God will judge the secrets of men through Jesus Christ. The same author, Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 5 says, don't go passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of men's hearts. And then each man's praise will come to him from God. What a sobering thought, that God doesn't so much see our actions as he sees the motives behind the actions. I often say that to myself, and I say it to others too. I don't know. I just hope and pray my motive was right in doing what I did, because I know God knows my motives for doing what I do and why I do it. And then he goes on and says, not only that, whatever you have spoken in the dark, so not only what you've done, but whatever you've spoken in the dark will be heard in the light. In other words, everything will be put into the light of the knowledge of God. As you know, I was a cop, and we would get to the police station in the morning, and all the bad deeds done during the night would be on the telephone pad, and we'd go around in the day and investigate what had happened in the night. It's all the sin. People think the night time's a great time to do sin, robberies, etc., because nobody can see you. What they don't realise is that God sees everything, and it will all ultimately be manifest in the light. So here's Jesus in front of this huge crowd, talking to his disciples, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, it's hypocrisy, and everything that is hidden will be revealed, it'll be uncovered, and everything that is spoken in darkness will be revealed in the light and heard in the light. And what you have spoken in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. The inner rooms in these Jewish houses were right in the middle of the houses, and they used to store things in there. And if someone wanted a private conversation, they would go right into the inner room, and in hushed conversations, they would have a secret conversation with another person. Jesus says everything that a person has said or done, or the motive behind it, etc., will be brought out, and it is though it will be broadcast on a loudspeaker system on the top of a house, because everything is known by God. So God is saying, just wait. I'm prepared to judge all of that. What's the problem with hypocrites? Well, it's bad enough in the secular world. What's the problem with religious hypocrites? The problem is they lead people to eternal damnation. See, we live in an age in the church where the words unity, tolerance, and let's all get together, let's love one another, is huge, and people are prepared to sweep under the carpet straight out error. This is not Jesus' method. Jesus says, beware of the hypocrites, or the leaven of the Pharisees, because it is hypocrisy. It will all come out, and us as preachers and teachers and Christians who know the Word of God should be prepared to know the truth and stand up for the truth. To the Lord's glory. Amen.